Welcome to another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw. We're going to be covering Ray Dalio and other experts who said that civil war will be coming to America in the next few months and definitely by the 2024 election. Now, this news is a few months old, but we hadn't seen it really covered by the mainstream media very well. So we're going to take an in-depth look into what one of the world's smartest financial advisors ever to exist has said and why he's predicting civil war coming up. We'll also talk to or look at a few other experts and go from there. But first, take a look at this. Ray Dalio is one of the richest men in the world. He's also one of the most intelligent financial investors in the world. His hedge fund company was the world's top investor in 2005. The man has made billions and he's made himself a billionaire. He doesn't owe anybody. He doesn't owe anything to anyone. He's able to speak freely and he's largely retired. Recently, Ray Dalio wrote a book about the future of the world. Now, in that book, he predicts a coming civil war. And it's not because of Trump or Hillary. He says institutions just don't work in America like they used to. And when that you look at large factors throughout history, not just the myopic view of the 2016 election, not just Trump and Hillary, but if you look at large views of history coming and going through this period, it's clear based upon a pattern of history, not particularly personalities, that we will have a civil war coming in America very soon. I'll show you. And what's interesting about this is that no one less than presidential candidate Andrew Yang was the one to talk to him about this and cover it. Well, let's get right into it. Why are experts predicting civil war and why should you care? Well, let me take you on a journey. First, let's cover Ray Dalio. That's Ray Dalio right there. Ray Dalio is an American billionaire investor and hedge fund manager who has served as the co-investment chair of the world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates, since 1985. He founded Bridgewater in 1975. And here's the key part. Investment career rise to power. Okay, Bridgewater Associates became the world's largest hedge fund in 2005. So this is possibly the smartest man on earth looking at how to invest money globally. His investment fund invests globally. And so he's very aware since 1985 about international monetary policies and investment. He actually lived in China and had his son educated in China for a few years. I don't know many Americans or many white people who've had their kids educated in China, but he did it in the 80s when nobody was doing that. And he routinely travels to China. So anyways, very smart man, very aware of global economy, very aware of economics, and here's what he has to say. Let's go to Ray Dalio. Yes, here we go. This is Ray Dalio. The article is Ray Dalio on the chances of civil war in the United States and the rise of China on Yahoo Finance. Let's take a listen.
The U.S. has a 30% chance of devolving into a civil war within the next 10 years. What would cause that to happen and who would be responsible for that?
Well, let me clarify what I mean. What I mean is that fighting over the rules, it doesn't mean necessarily shooting each other, although you could see much more violence. It means that the rules of the system, that democracy by rule of law and the deferring to what the rules are, for example, to settle elections or settle issues, I think that could be largely lost. I think.
So he's talking about the breakdown of the system, that people don't follow the law or the courts. They'll reject the courts. They'll reject the laws. They'll do whatever they want. California wanted to smoke marijuana and follow stem cell laws. Yeah, they'll just do it, even though the federal government said not to. Other people said that Donald Trump was the elected president, and half the country didn't accept that. The Supreme Court's about to overturn Roe v. Wade, and most people aren't going to accept that and are talking about ignoring the Supreme Court. When you have institutions and the people just say, nah, I don't want to follow them, that's when you have collapse and civil war. That's what he's saying, and he's looking at those things. And certainly all of that's true. All of the Democrats doubted that Donald Trump was the elected president, and all of the Republicans doubted that Biden was the elected president. And we just had a murder threat on a Supreme Court justice because a bunch of liberals decided to post every address of the Supreme Court out there with no concern on anybody gets killed or murdered. Regardless of your stance on Roe v. Wade, looking at a systemic view, this is right before systems collapse. And that's what Ray Dalio is saying. And he says, you need to look at systems, and there is no agreed upon, this is what the law says, this is what the court says, and we have to follow it, you get civil war. And the man studied economics in many nations, emerging nations, falling nations, rising nations, etc. He has some idea of it. Okay, let's take a little bit more of a listen. Now that's Andrew Yang, presidential candidate, talking about what a civil war in America would look like with Ray Dalio. Presidential candidate of America discussing with top financial investor of world why he thinks civil war is coming to America. Let's take a listen.
Are individuals who are fighters for those constituencies. And there are very different values, very different approaches. What that means is that there's little compromise and there's much greater extremism, very much like happened in Europe. 4 major democracies in the 1930 to 45 period had this type of internal conflict that ended up their parliaments, their legislatures choosing to have autocracies, that they went to autocracies, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Spain. And if you study history, you see it was the same in the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, which are all sort of civil wars. You lose the middle, and because you have to say, Andrew, you got to get on one side or another and fight. When the causes that people are behind are more important to them than the system is in jeopardy. And so you see just even people moving from place to place in terms of where they think it's more sympathetic to their way of being and what they're like. You know, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, California moves to Texas and so on. And you're seeing then not as much respect for the Constitution and the legal system because you have a win at all costs.
Just look at Andrew Yang's face. Do you see that his eyes are drooping down and his nose is drooping down and his cheekbones are drooping down? I study facial expressions. That is the look of a depressed, sobered face. This guy was running for president, and he was one of the most upbeat people in the entire election season running for president. Here he is looking completely dejected while Ray Dalio explains everything that's going on in America now. Andrew Yang disagrees with none of Ray Dalio's observations. And then Ray Dalio says, and so given all that, it equals civil war, to which Andrew Yang does not disagree. Now, Andrew Yang did not agree, but look at that face, and he didn't disagree. And he doesn't disagree with his talking points. Now, he didn't say, oh, yeah, I think civil war is coming, but where's the pushback from Andrew Yang? And where's that smiling face that was on the campaign trail about the future of America? It's not there. Why would he have that face on him?
So, for example, if you have the dispute between, let's say, Disney and the Florida governor, in the past, there would have been almost mutual respect for different points of view. But what you now get back is you get back to a power conflict. Well, you know, what would the odds put? I'll ask you what you think the odds are that, for example, in the next presidential election, that neither side accepts losing. You know, I'd say,
Did you see how he said the next presidential election, 2024, neither side accepts losing? To which Andrew Yang nodded his head. Former presidential candidate, nodding his head, saying the country's so polarized, you could possibly have an election in 2024 where nobody accepts who won. Yeah, think about that. Okay, let's take a look at this. This is also Andrew Yang talking about the Civil War and the interview he just did with Ray Dalio with a co-host of his. Let's take a listen.
And by the way, like my intuition is also very much heading in that direction.
Right.
And this isn't a partisan thing. This is just like I think shit's gonna get nasty. Maybe like really dark and nasty. In the spirit of more positive news, Ray also talks about in his book, essentially a 30% chance of a civil war or civil unrest in the United States.
Civil War.
He said civil war. Yeah. Stage 6 is what he calls it.
Jesus.
We're in stage 5 of 6. And was it tied to the economy or just simply because of polarization and this changing world order? So just like it was a mega credit cycle that has 6 stages, apparently there's an internal order disorder cycle that has 6 stages. And it's tied to public use of resources. So there's a peace and prosperity phase in stage 3, and then stage 4 involves excess debt and unproductive use of resources. Stage 5, which we're in right now, is called the decline, where you have internal conflicts and debt problems. And then stage 6 is civil war / unrest. And during my interview with him, I said to him, it's like, hey, Ray, you said in your book, 30% chance, that's staggeringly high. And he's like, oh, it's higher now.
Oh, God.
Because he wrote this probably, 12, 18 months ago. And this is also a mega cycle that takes a number of decades. He talked about what you would need to counteract it. He said that there are 2 types of outcomes. The more likely outcome is a nasty populist type strongman figure. And then the benign case is what he called strong peacemaker.
So Andrew Yang was saying that he was talking to Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio in his book a few months ago predicted a 30% chance of civil war. He did the interview recently with Andrew Yang and now says the percentage chance of civil war is higher. That's right. Andrew Yang interviewed Ray Dalio, and Ray Dalio said the chance of civil war in America now is higher than 30%, maybe even 40%. And then Ray Dalio also said what likely is going to happen is a populist like Donald Trump coming back into power into 2024. That's what Andrew Yang was pointing out. So think about that. You have a presidential candidate, one of the most positive, hey, America forward, we can solve any challenge. And here he is talking to a guy about civil war. He's not laughing at him, and his face is like this. Where's the smiling Andrew Yang? Where's the man who believes in the future of America, that any problem can be solved through technology and innovation? He's simply not to be seen when interviewing Ray Dalio. And Ray Dalio is one of the smartest, most informed people about the climate of the earth regarding economics and political stability. And they're talking about civil war and also saying the chance is higher than 30%, and also saying this likely ends with a demagogue in 2024, aka another type of Trump candidate. Yeah, stuff to think about. Give me 1 second here. Okay, well, Ray Dalio is not alone in predicting the Civil War. He is one of another couple experts. The other expert is a guy named Stephen March. Now, Stephen March is from Canada, and he wrote a book on secession recently. Let's take a listen to what Stephen March, another expert who predicts civil war, had to say and why. All right, 1 second. All right, here's Stephen March. It's the U.S. on verges of civil war, the agenda. There's the date and all the title information. We're going to watch it to 3:41.
You no doubt saw some of the coverage last week of the first anniversary of the events of January 6, 2021. Many of us watched in astonishment a year ago as the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. came under attack. Someone who probably wasn't surprised was Canadian author Stephen March, who has been predicting a second American Civil War for some time. He characterizes what he thinks is coming in his new book, The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future. And with that, we welcome Stephen March back to our program from Seton Village in Ontario's capital city. Stephen, it's good to see you again. How you doing?
Good to see you too.
Let's start by me putting to you a quote that is in your book. This is from retired U.S. Army Colonel Peter Mansour, who said, "It would not be like the first Civil War with armies maneuvering on the battlefield," he says. "I think it would very much be a free-for-all, neighbor on neighbor, based on beliefs and skin colors and religion, and it would be horrific." Well, that certainly sets the scene. And my first question for you is, how much, in your view, did Donald Trump's presidency contribute to your sense of an impending civil war?
Very little, to be honest. I think one of the aspects of this book is trying to get below the sort of horse race politics that dominates coverage. What Marjorie Taylor Greene's Twitter feed is saying, or what Ted Cruz did or didn't do on Fox News. And Donald Trump, of course, was the master of that kind of, aggressive politics. The trends here are really deep. I think the thing I found really hardest to explain, particularly to liberal Americans, is that I believe everything in this book would have happened if Hillary Clinton had been elected in 2016.
Okay, that's a fascinating insight, but let me put it this way.
Again, Stephen Marsh taking the same talking point as Ray Dalio, that it's not about specific personalities, Trump or Clinton, it is about the system itself falling apart. And hence why he predicted a civil war would happen regardless of Hillary or Trump. That's also what Ray Dalio is saying. Systemic problems.
I'm a lot older than you, and I was alive for the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. You don't have to rub it in. But anyway, I do remember when political assassination seemed far too frequent. It was horrific. And yet America did not descend into a civil war at that time, even though it sure looked like it might happen. Why do you think what we're seeing today could lead to worse?
Well, the 60s were very dramatic, and there were, of course, major conflicts, and 140 cities burned after the assassination of MLK. And political assassination is very common in American history. Basically 1 out of 11 presidents have been assassinated, a little less now. But to compare that, Britain has only had 1 prime minister assassinated. So, as one Secret Service agent said to me, assassination is part of the political process in the United States. What's changed now, what's different from the 60s, is that the institutions are no longer prepared to deal with the fallout from violence. So you don't have the same legitimacy of the political institutions. You don't have the same legitimacy in the legal institutions. If you take an event like Watergate, in hindsight, that was evidence of the system working. You had a press that investigated corruption. You had an audience that believed the press. You had politicians who then needed to respond to the mass sense of corruption. And then from that, you had political legal action from both parties. None of that would happen today. That's why America is so much more vulnerable. It's because its institutions are in decline.
Now, it seems to me back in the day, the biggest advantage in the United States, or one of them anyway, was sort of left versus right.
Okay, now let's take another look at minute 20 to 22. I'm going to play that for 2 minutes.
The fact that basic government functions have become ludicrous high-stakes games, like the appointment of diplomats, the constant flirting around reneging on the debt, which is just totally insane, and then the Build Back Better bill, which is essentially a budget. I mean, that's a Wednesday in most mature democracies. That's true, but there are real structural problems too here. Like by 2040, the estimates suggest that about 30% of the population will control 68% of the Senate. Another way of putting that is 50% of the population.
That's where he's talking about something we talk about all the time. Tom, tyranny of the minority, that baked into the Constitution, and it used to work for a long time, is that 35 states who can represent 1/3 of the population can overrule what 2/3 of the population wants, because states have rights and not people. States have exorbitant influence on the Senate, on the Electoral College, which reflects the presidency, and the president selects Supreme Court justices. The Senate alone confirms Supreme Court justices. When you add those two systems together, it also means outsized influence on the Supreme Court for those 35 states, which are now saying, with Roe v. Wade being overturned, with the majority of Americans saying, why are you doing that? So why? Because tyranny of the minority, which is exactly what Stephen just said. Systemic breakdown of America. And he's pointing to the thing that we've been pointing to since 2018.
They control 84% of the Senate. And already you have a Supreme Court where 5 out of 9 justices were not selected by a president who won the popular mandate. And when they make a decision on abortion, whichever way it goes, half the country will feel it's illegitimate. That's no one's fault. That's a problem with structure. And I mean, to me, when I look at American politics, what I see is not, we need better leaders. If only we could get moderate Republicans in. If only we could figure something out. It's more like this system is very antiquated. It's 240 years old. Jefferson said you should only have a constitution for 19 years. It's time to get another one.
Well, we'll talk in a bit about how
The
that
American-
might potentially happen.
What he's saying is the American system is broke because the Constitution itself. And elections won't fix that because the Constitution no longer works. You'd have to rip apart the whole thing in order to fix America. And to which these people are like smiling and making faces.
But I wonder, Julie, if I can go back to this issue of sane versus insane as part of what led us to this moment. I mean, there is a, and I can't tell you what the percentage is, but there's
Okay. Same interview. Let's go to 3750 to 3813. Take a listen.
would be a lot of conservatives in the United States who would simply be happier about being Americans if, for example, California were just its own country, or the New England states or New York were their own country. What do you think?
Yeah, that's right. You heard it. So they're talking about America headed to civil war. And the host himself, who's not from California, says, well, speaking about America, what if California seceded? So they're talking about civil war. And the first example he has is, what if California secedes? Wouldn't conservatives like that? That's literally what he said. And that's something we've been saying at Calexit for 4 to 5 years.
Well, look, in some ways it would make our lives easier, but that doesn't mean that we should do it. I think Stephen was absolutely right when he said earlier that America is our house. This is our home. This is our country. And we have a duty to preserve and protect it, right? I am not.
So this guy's saying, don't secede, even though it would make life easier because of our sacred duty.
Whether you think there would be a lot of conservatives in the United States who would simply be happier about being Americans if, for example, California were just its own country, or the New England states or New York were their own country. What do you think?
Well, look, in some ways it would make our lives easier, but that doesn't mean that we should do it. I think Stephen was absolutely right when he said earlier that.
Right. So California conservatives would love America better if California was gone, to which the guy says, totally agree as an American. And while it would make things work better in America and it would solve all the problems, we shouldn't do it out of a sacred obligation to keep America together. So yes, it would work. Yes, they could pull it off. Yes, it would make things better. Yes, conservatives would want that. Yes, it would lower the tension, but don't do that out of a sense of duty. That's what he's saying. So let's go to the next one here.
Way to deal with this without having to deal with some really significant national divorce scenario.
Well, Dylan, as I get your take on this, I guess I should point out that Texas does have a bit of a separatist movement down there. And California is easily one of the top, I think it's the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world already. So it's pretty obvious they could exist as their own country, as presumably could New York State.
And there he is saying, oh, we're talking about a civil war. Well, what if California secedes? Wouldn't conservatives like that? Yes. By the way, I need to make sure to point out California could absolutely survive on its own as an independent nation. That's what they said. Okay, let's take last listen here. Same show.
The kind of breakdown is so sectional and regional as it was in the 1860s. If you look at a province like Quebec, there's no analog in the United States for the kind of sovereigntist nationalist movement of CAQ or PQ. There's no Californian sovereigntist movement. There's no Texas sovereigntist movement. And
so that's a lie. Here's the guy saying, oh, civil war is not going to happen in America. You guys are overblowing this issue. I'm from America. I would know. Okay, well, why do you know? Well, because there's no real secession movement in Texas and California. Yeah, it's the year 2022. And he goes, yeah, there's no real secession movement in Texas and California. So the Texas Republican Party didn't file for secession. There wasn't a Texas legislator who filed for secession. There isn't a lieutenant governor in Texas going for secession. You didn't have a senator from Texas talk about let's secede. None of that happened. So there's no Texas secession movement at all. Therefore, civil war won't happen. And by the way, there's no California secession movement. There was no Calexit movement. Never happened. You never had 1/3, 32% of Californians say they wanted secession immediately, and 47.5%, according to Reuters, Ipsos, and Stanford University in February 2017, two separate surveys also saying basically half of Californians were open to secession. So because the Calexit movement and the Texas movement never happened, we don't need to worry about civil war. Well, since he's wrong about that, what do you think that means?
And most of the cleavages are internal to states. It's Austin versus rural Texas. It's San Francisco versus Humboldt County.
So that's the other part where he's wrong. So Austin might be versus rural Texas, but when he's talking about California, San Francisco does not care what Humboldt County thinks. They don't care what the conservative parts of California think. All of California is basically liberal. I live in the Central Valley. It's gone blue. Now, it's not as strong blue as the Bay Area and LA, but it's blue, and the demographic trends only show it becoming more blue. The only place where you have a solid red bastion is in the far north or the mountains. That's not sectional. That's not spotted. That is easily cleaved apart. So when all of California is basically blue and going to stay blue, except for the mountains, which are butted up against Nevada, and except for the far north, which is butted up against Oregon, yes, you can have simple splits. And I just wanted to point out that this guy is saying, oh, we're not going to head to civil wars because there's only regional differences, there's no state on state, and there is no Calexit or Texas movement. Well, he was wrong on all that. So maybe this guy arguing against civil war is totally wrong about what he's saying. Something to think about. But I also wanted to mention this. You know, this is one of my, let me show you this. This is from Nate Silver. Now, Nate Silver is one of the top political consultants in America. And even he predicted that there might be California seceding because of Tom, tyranny of the minority. Let me show you that right now. We can take a listen. And I just want to point, these are all top-level experts. I'm not bringing up Joe Bob's website. These are big names saying this stuff. Ray Dalio's a big name. Stephen March is a big name. Nate Silver is a big name. These are mainstream people who are looking at hard statistics and saying, looks like civil war or national divorce. Okay, let's take a look at Nate Silver. Here's Nate Silver, one of the most foremost political experts in America. And he was speaking on this show, Watch Partisans Don't Just Disagree, They Hate One Another, on 538's podcast on YouTube. Let me show you that real quick. So this is where that show came from. Partisans Don't Just Disagree, They Hate One Another podcast, January 25th, 2021. That's 538. That's where this episode came from. Now, let me show you the clip from Nate Silver.
It's sort of, that's one of the reasons that I at least wanted to dig into this, was to really think hard about like what kind of unity is possible at this moment, given where we are, and what kind of unity is helpful.
I mean, I think the point about like things being layered on top of one another and self-reinforcing.
That's
right?
Nate Silver.
Is kind of the scary part of this, right? It's almost like the climate system where you get feedback loops and you have feedbacks that are negative feedbacks and therefore suppress some harmful property, but you have positive reinforcing feedbacks here. And it's you know, at some point, I don't know what the end point is, right? At some point, like, you know, what is a chance that 25 years from now that we will not have all 50 states as currently intact? Maybe there's some red state secedes or some blue state secedes, right? I don't think it's high, but it's also like, if you think about like, if this keeps spiraling out of control, then that's one of the things that could regulate it in the end. Is like California could say, you know what, we're tired of being run by this minoritarian Republican Party, right? Or Texas could say, we want out of.
Nate Silver said, if things spiral out of control. if things spiral out of control in America, meaning that the system no longer works, people no longer respect the rule of law, the courts, or the results of elections, then you could have an America broken apart. Well, that's exactly what Stephen Marsh said, and that's exactly what Ray Dalio said. Why are all three of these guys pointing at systemic failures of America and coming to the prediction of a breakup or national divorce of America in the near future? I'll leave that to you. Maybe they don't know what they're talking about. Maybe a political science professor out of Canada, political science expert in America, one of the foremost ones, and maybe one of the world's smartest financial investors who knows world global markets better than anyone. Maybe they got it all wrong. They're just saying stuff. But then why are they all saying it roughly around the same time? Nate Silver said this about a year and a half ago. Stephen March's interview was his book came out about a year ago, and he's been doing interviews for the last half year. And Ray Dalio's book came out about half a year ago, and he's been doing interviews recently. So why in the last year and a half to 6 months are these three guys all coming to the same conclusion about the inevitable dissolution of the United States? Well, that's for you to answer. We just wanted to make sure that you were informed. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.